everybody. Thanks for coming out. Can you all hear me in the back? Yeah. All right. Well, I saw the title of this workshop is the same title of the essay that I'm going to be presenting on during the panel later. So I wanted to do something a little bit different, if that's all right. What I was thinking was, I'm sorry, I have a lounger if it sounds a little, I'm getting over a cold. But what I was thinking was a bit of a word association game of sorts. And it's not, it would be like what comes to mind, we'll go toward every term you see behind me. And it wouldn't be like a radical political litmus test or anything. More like, you can think of it like an ink blot, but not of your individual psyche. Be more like reflection on the cultural and societal psyche, because we all know what's in popular discourse when we hear these words, but also critical, radical politics as well. So good or bad, I just wanted to go over each term and see, have people blurt out words that come to mind, and I'll try to list them all, or at least like a few for each, and then I wanted to pepper in there some stories and some narratives of examples that transcend issues: Palestine, U.S.-Mexico border, indigeneity, radical politics. And so if that sounds okay, I mean, I'd like lots of discussion and participation to make me less of a talking head. So if that's cool, I'll start. So any brave soul start us off and then just go everywhere else? What words come to mind? Immigrant or migrant?
Displacement.
Displacement. What else?
Foreigners.
Quotes.
Refugee.
Refugee.
Newcomer.
Newcomer.
Border.
Border.
Borders. Borders.
Borders.
Instability.
Instability. What about for the next one?
Mexican.
Illegal.
And I'll put that one in quotes too. Legal oppression? Legally oppressed.
Worker.
Worker.
Xenophobia. Packing plants.
Very good, especially for this area in the Midwest.
Yeah.
Packing plant.
Fear.
Detention centers.
What about citizenship?
Legitimacy. Piece of paper. Stupid piece of paper.
Was the word before that legitimacy?
Yes. Nation states. Patriots. Hi.
Pride.
Civics.
Civic.
Assimilation.
Rights. Animals.
What about settler?
Colonizer.
Intruder. Outsider.
Hater, traitor. What was that?
Intruder.
Intruder. And what was the other one I heard?
Outsider.
Outsider.
Arrogant.
Browser,
What's that?
browser,
Pioneer.
European, Southbusters, Southbusters,
Spell the first word.
Busters. S-O-D.
farmers.
Is that all one word? Southbuster. I haven't heard that one.
Providence.
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 Trailers.
Trailers.
Yeah. Like mobile homes.
Illegitimate.
What about indigenous?
Indian, shamans,
Rightful.
Land.
Land.
Rooted.
Rooted.
Broken treaties.
First Peoples,
Um, so when all these come to mind, and we'll get into it as we go, but I wanted to start us off by this annual report that the American, the ADL. Anyone know about the ADL?
Yeah.
and what are they?
Yeah, what does it stand for? What do they do?
An Anti-Defamation League. They allegedly fight racism, and they mostly do a lot of stuff to support Israel.
They're one of the most ardent supporters in the United States of Israel-aligned propaganda, and hate, and spying, repression here in the U.S. They've supported it all. They came out, they do these annual reports on campus climates, anti-Israel, especially quote-unquote anti-Israel activities. And in 2011, 2012, they focused on two, what they call ubiquitous strategies that are particularly dangerous and are things that Israel supporters in the U.S. should be mindful of. And they identified two. One of them was pinkwashing. You all heard that term? And the other one, does someone want to, how would you define what pinkwashing is? Anyone?
Advertising. Is Israel advertising that they're gay friendly? LGBTQ friendly.
So that was one strategy, and then we've seen a lot of that on campuses since then, especially, but a little bit before. And the ADL set its sights on that. And the other one that they said was ubiquitous and dangerous was what they called U.S.-Mexico border analogies. They had been seeing lots of that on campuses by Students for Justice in Palestine groups and Mecha groups. And they said that in that report that we have to be afraid of these sorts of strategies coming up. So I wanted to throw that out there first as something that Israel supporters are on the lookout for. Now, a couple of stories that I see that a lot of these connect, that I wanted to provide and maybe discuss. One of them has to do a lot with this column, and it has to do with LaBuka Hall, who lives in Florida now, but at the time that I'll be quoting her, she was speaking in Chicago, where she grew up. She's a migrant justice activist, but she's Palestinian and she's undocumented. So when she'll speak publicly, she'll always put that front and center as her identity, and also as something that problematizes the whole discourse and discussion, and how so often, even whether according to the ADL or others, these issues should be separate. Because for one thing, ADL and even their fellow right-wing Israel-supporting groups like the Jewish Federation of North America, on issues that they say should be separate from Palestine, say U.S.-Mexico border, anti-militarization, humanitarian assistance of migrants, they're very liberal. They're among the most liberal in the U.S. on that question. So I work in a humanitarian group called No Mas Muertes, No More Deaths, and we do political advocacy and as well as humanitarian aid. And the Jewish Federation is one of our biggest supporters. They would sign all of the documents we would put out, and we would have coalition sponsors, and Jewish Federation is always there and supporting the act of giving water in the desert. And the ADL was the first non-Latino group in the United States to come out in defense of ethnic studies when my state, Arizona, banned ethnic studies in 2010. Have you all heard about this?
Yeah.
For those who haven't, HB 2281 is the bill that became law, now ARS 11115. And what it does is it says that public schools cannot teach ethnic solidarity. That's their phrase. That's illegal. And they cannot teach the overthrow of the United States government. That's written into state law. And they cannot promote resentment of a race or class of people, namely white people. And that the law was written specifically for the Tucson Unified School District, which was my district, and there were 4 schools in the district that had a Mexican American Studies program, the only Mexican American Studies program at the high school level in the country. Not anymore, but at the time and for many years it was. And it was very successful. Excuse while I pause to explain this, because it's quite a story. According to a University of Arizona audit of the program that looked at the graduation rates of high school students who took the program and looked at the graduation rates of high school students that didn't take the program, they found that 90% of those who took the program were mostly Latino, graduated, because it's a mostly Latino district, which is amazing if you take into account where Latinos lie in national dropout rates. And when their second conclusion was that you were more likely to graduate if you took the program, no matter what your race or ethnicity is, than would you not have taken the program. So this program, it's the most successful in the district, no matter if of all the other mostly white prep academies or not. And the ADL is one of those groups that is very liberal on the issue of ethnic studies, very liberal on the issue of migrant justice. And that's why in the report and elsewhere, you'll often find Zionists they become very, very belligerent whenever these cross-movement analyses discussions come up, because it's very problematizing. It turns it into a crisis, because all over the country, it's very important to them to establish coalitional ties with Latino groups. And if the discussion turns on Palestine, and I'll give a couple of examples later, when there are migrant issues within Israel, when there are issues of migrant justice, when there are issues of borders in Israel, all of a sudden this liberal on domestic issues group becomes this rabid, mouth-foaming, right-wing, anti-immigrant voice. And so it's very important to them not to get into those discussions. And so in that respect, forcing these sorts of discussions can be a very valuable organizing tool and an educational tool. So with LaBuka Hall, her family were forced out of what is now Israel in 1948, and they went to Kuwait, and then they came to the United States on a visa. But as many of us know, when visas run out and families have no other option, the LaBuka Hall family decided to go off under the grid. And for nearly 2 decades or more, she and the rest of the family lived, as she says, in the shadows and in shame. And they lived with many of these words that we came up with. But as she'll say, I can't cut myself up into different pieces and issues, quoting her in a public speech. My struggle as an undocumented person is intertwined with who I am as a Palestinian. The reason I am undocumented today is directly connected with what happened in 1948, when Israel conquered 78% of historic Palestine before taking over the remaining 22% in 1967 through occupation and settlement that continues to this day with firm U.S. support. The struggles, she says, though not the same, intersect and intertwine. I wanted to bring up examples like this and a couple others because often one of the arguments against these sorts of discussions, cross-movement building, intersectionality, is that there's this politics of analogy, and that it's too theoretical, or you have to be careful making these analogies for fear of equating or prioritizing one over the other. And to some extent, I won't argue with that. There's some elements of truth in that. But it's examples like Allah that we have to remind ourselves are not theoretical. These are cases that are concrete, and they transcend lots of the issues, especially if there are discourses that say these issues are separate. Now, another example, which is very interesting, and this comes from an investigative report by Haaretz, which is an Israeli daily newspaper, one of the leading Israeli newspapers. And it looked into, I'll give a little bit of context that the article didn't go into, but essentially we know that there are economic systems are perfected oftentimes by oppression and exploitation. Right? So one of those examples is this process called manual pruning, and it has to do with migrants in California, mostly Mexican migrants. And this process in the industry, to be known as manual pruning, was perfected by these specific migrants in this specific area for that specific industry. But when the industry carries over, and we find ourselves in the Israeli-occupied territories, particularly in the Jordan Valley, when manual pruning is brought over, and in shorthand, it's been known in the industry as Mexican pruning. And the laborers that are doing that work are Palestinian, and so they become to be known by shorthand as Mexicans. And so you go in the Jordan Valley, specifically the date pruning industry, many of the Palestinian workers, very, very young to very, very old, and they'll be climbing multiple stories date trees is very dangerous work, and bathroom breaks, horrid conditions, many injuries, health conditions that are they're very bad. They're known as Mexicans, but it's not only them. Taxi cab drivers in the area as well will be known in short as Mexicans as well. And so this is another example of you see how the issues carry over. And there's innumerable examples. I mean, and I'll go one more, and then I wanted to just really open it up. But for settler and citizenship, we think of Israeli settlers, you hear that phrase in the media or elsewhere, and there's not much talk beyond that about who are the settlers. But if you go, New York Times did a piece a couple of years ago on I don't remember the exact technical name of it, but it's a program specifically designed for pulling in foreign settlers from all over the world. And the military official who was quoted in the piece talked about how often these foreign settlers who come to Israel to claim their so-called birthrights, they are often more ardent than Israelis who have been settling for generations. And specifically looking at the U.S., according to Israeli and U.S. State Department census data, at least 15% of all the hundreds of thousands of settlers in the West, only in the West Bank, and that's not including East Jerusalem, 15% are U.S. citizens. So if we think about what it means to have U.S. citizenship, many of these words, one additional privilege for this specific ethnic group in the United States is that they can cross with ease to become settlers, colonial settlers, and they carry that privilege with them, and they do all of the things that settlers do. So I wanted to give those three examples just to start us off and open it up for whatever you'd like to discuss or ask and comments. I mean, no rules.
Hey, said we're going to talk about how Israel was going to arm the border in Arizona.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to talk about that later tonight, but I can, if you like, I'm happy to do it. We have a lot of time. Is there anything specifically you'd like to know?
Yeah, I came for the session 2 or whatever it is. How Israel high-tech firms will up-arm the U.S. and Mexican border. Gabe Shalom. You're on.
All right. I'll give it a couple minutes on that. Basically, what's that?
You're doing good.
Okay, well, specifically on that's taken from an essay that I and a co-author named Todd Miller, we wrote a piece in Tom Dispatch, and it got picked up all over the place. And it's a long essay. Encourage everyone to read it if you have time. It's kind of long, but it's got a lot of information. It's the product of a year-long investigation that we undertook in Tucson, Arizona. And what we found and what we were looking at is specifically a partnership of U.S. Tucson-based corporations and why they were developing over the course of several years. They just went public in the last year, but they had been building this partnership with Israel, with Israeli companies. We wanted to ask them why, so we interviewed a number of CEOs and corporate executives and just asked them, why Israel? And they started fawning about what led them to that, and particularly they had the problem of asking themselves how they can compete with other capitalists and other technology parks throughout the country. So the main actor in this triangular relationship between Israel, the United States, based in Tucson, southern Arizona, and Mexico, is this place called the University of Arizona Science and Technology Park, or UA Tech Park for short. And it's a business incubator. And so it's off in the edge of town, in the middle of, which is in that area in the southeast Tucson, in the middle of nowhere. So it's the perfect terrain to test out latest in border security technology. I mean, Raytheon, IBM, other companies have offices in the tech park. I mean, students don't go to this campus. This campus is specifically for corporations that set up offices, and the U of A Tech Park, what it does is, calling itself an incubator, is they provide research and development facilities, they provide expertise, the brightest minds at the University of Arizona at their disposal for these corporations, big and small. Now, when I was talking to the CEO, he was explaining to me the concept of security clusters. It's a very technical term. Anybody heard about this? It comes from a theory, economist theory. But what Bruce Wright, who's the CEO, was telling me, and this dude, by the way, you know, you meet this guy, he's very, very well spoken, and he's very charismatic. His hair is parted, he wears a suit, and he's very polite, very nice. You know, he strikes me as someone who would never say anything bad about Mexicans, about migrants themselves individually. But his agenda is to provide solutions to a problem. And the problem is the problem of border security. And he's very upfront about how it's a lucrative industry. There's lots of money to be made. As he says, like, why shouldn't we make a buck if there is a need for border security? But he's coming from the sort of person involved in military defense, border security, academic complex, we can call it, who is very, like I said, charismatic. There's a gleam in his eye when he starts talking about border security and all the possibilities. You know, in the next 5 years, border security is projected to be a more than $500 billion a year industry. When he says that, he's very excited, because they're all excited about this. But contrast that with U.S. Border Patrol, who the way that they talk is in a way of neutralizing a threat. They talk very in militaristic terms, you know, enemy, us, them. But these complex builders, like Bruce Wright, they're very excited. You know, you get them talking about border security, and you can just watch that gleam in their eye. Now, when he's telling me about why he loves Israel, he'll say, put it back to the cluster, the security cluster. And what that is in the industry, big and small companies, even though they technically compete against each other, they tend to cluster together, because it's that term synergy, where all the elements create something that's more important as a whole. And so it makes sense for all of them individually to cluster together, to an extent share resources, share knowledge, share development. And so Bruce Wright tells me that they've identified 57 border security companies that focus on border security, big and small. We're talking about the Raytheons, and we're talking about the entrepreneurial companies set up out of people's garages, sometimes literally, that want to make a buck in this big booming industry. And they identified 57 in southern Arizona, which is unique, they say. And that's what he says he wants to, and they want to do, is use this tech park business incubator to expand that cluster and to make as much money as possible. That's really the purpose. Now, he's told me he wants that, and it is, to be the biggest, the #1 security cluster in North America. And right now, it is. I mean, because this is the place to have the security cluster and make all this money on border security. But he stopped himself to me. He said, it wouldn't be the first, and it wouldn't be the biggest, not in the world. Israel really is the first. And this is what he told me. And when they started to ask themselves, how can we do this project? There's a booming industry. What are the regional strengths that we have in southern Arizona? Because in their minds, they see that there are hundreds of tech parks in North America, and they can't possibly, in Tucson, little old Tucson, like nobody can even spell it or say it. If it sounds like Tucson spelled out, and if you try and spell it Tucson, it's spelled Tucson. If you try and spell it, you usually say Tuscon. Even Professor Chomsky, a linguist, sent an email about Tucson and misspell it, and so the point is that like nobody's heard of Tucson, nobody cares. Like, so what do we have that can compete, with like San Jose and Silicon Valley and all these tech parks? So the three strengths that they identified were border security, military and defense, hydrology or water, and solar power. And as he explained, each one of these regional strengths that Southern Arizona that they can harness thanks to colonial settlements over 100 years in Arizona. These are some of these industry strengths. Each one of those, he said, led them straight back to Israel as the world's leader in this technology. And he's, like I said, he's fawning, he's booming over Israel, saying that there's 600 startup companies every single year in Tel Aviv, and they're and the way that he understands why Israel is so proficient, he'll tell me, is think about how in Israel they have that universal draft where every single graduating high school senior has to go into the military. Now, he says like that's one of the reasons why they're so good at high-tech military hardware and development, because like, these students are going into the workforce with military background, military experience, where they've seen high-tech weaponry in the field tested out already. So when they get into when they're into the workforce, they have this background already, and it's high developing. And so that's one of the reasons why he says Israel is so good at that. And there's other reasons too. But that's what Bruce Wright and the others at the tech park had that golden idea, and they call the partnership Global Advantage. And they partner with this
What do they call it?
Global Advantage. The idea is to use those strengths and lure companies from all over the world. That's the end goal. But as he told me, there was no question in his mind who the first client would be to, as they say, proof of concept, who would prove the concept and get funding and get support from states like Arizona and Sonora, which is northern Mexico, Arizona border Sonora, to support, to give political support, to give funding, give legitimacy to the Global Advantage after the years of developing it, which is what happened in the last year. The governors of Arizona and Sonora gave their hat tip and pledged to support Global Advantage with its first client to prove the concept, which is Israel, and it's always been Israel. And the partnership, the other side of the partnership with the tech park is this company called the Offshore Group. And it's also based in Tucson, but it's Mexican. Like its foothold is in the Mexican manufacturing sector of the economy. And so they have tech parks. They have big manufacturing tech parks in Sonora. And so they can offer a full package to Israeli companies. And they've been to Israel many times, where they go and they meet with various companies and they say, this is what Global Advantage is. This is why you should stop using China as your Mexico and use Mexico for your Mexico. We can offer you the best in R&D, research and development at the tech park, and if you come and set up offices in Tucson, then you'll be able to manufacture your products right over the border with the labor of ill-paid, blue-collar Mexican workers, who then would face death in the desert, would face the militarization of the very products that they're creating if they decide, as is likely, to migrate northward. So that's what this is, this triangular relationship that you see in southern Arizona, based there, but using tech parks in Mexico and manufacturing tech parks in Mexico, the R&D tech parks in Tucson, and then luring Israeli companies to come and set up shop there. And they're getting success already. He couldn't tell me, he said trade secrets, non-disclosure agreements. He couldn't tell me the exact Israeli companies, but they're talking between 10 and 20 of them. So he was very excited. In the next several months here, the first of a wave, expectedly, of Israeli companies will be in Tucson. and their offices will be there, presumably big and small, Israeli companies like other companies in the tech park. But that's essentially what the article is about.